Now we're going to shift to consider the other side of the consumer choice problem, and that is how do we explain what it is that people like? Remember that what we choose depends on a combination of two things. The first is what we like, and the second is what's available to you. We looked at what was available to you, and we described what was meant by a budget constraint or a budget set. And it's important to remember as we go through this that what you like doesn't necessarily depend on what's available, and what's available doesn't necessarily depend on what you like. As a way to illustrate the point, observe that the fact that more people drive Fords than drive Ferraris doesn't mean that people would prefer to drive a Ford than a Ferrari, but the choice they make is a combination of two things. One is what do they like, what sort of utility do they get from having a car generally, and what can you afford? Obviously Fords are much more affordable than Ferraris. Now, what we're going to do is we're going to describe the concept of preferences and think about sort of the ability that we might have to rank our choices from best to worst. And what we're going to do is to try to identify the choice that is best from the set of choices that are available. So how do we think about what we like best? And we're going to make some sort of basic assumptions that will help us through this process. And it's easiest to start with the assumptions and then see what the implications are that come out of that. The first assumption is that we can rank everything, that we can decide what we like better, and that's mostly, I think, an innocuous assumption. It's pretty straightforward, and I don't think too many people would argue that that's an unreasonable assumption. That basically, if I can compare one bundle to another, one of the following things is true. Either I like the first one better, I like the second one better, or I like them both the same. That's our assumption number one. Assumption number two says I prefer more of a good to less of the good. If a certain bundle has more of each good than the other bundle, I like the first bundle better than the second. If A has more of everything than B does, then I must like A more than B. Now, this is one of those things that you can get around with sort of careful definitions. For instance, we don't like pollution. Pollution is something that we would prefer to have less of. So one way to get around this problem, if we're thinking about pollution, is rather than call it pollution, call it clean air, and define it in a way that more is preferred to less. Also, can we run into problems with this if we have too much of something to the point where we get to the point where we don't like an additional one? And we can, but as a practical matter, that's going to tend to be not much of a problem. Most people are not going to be considering bundles or considering choices that push us out beyond having too much of everything. We might have enough of some things where we don't get much value on the margin, but I think that scarcity is a problem for all of us, and no matter where we are, what size our budget constraint, and where we are in our choice set. So more is preferred to less is maybe an assumption that we need to be thoughtful about, but it shouldn't be too restrictive as we think about the behavior of consumers. The third assumption we're going to make is that preferences are transitive. That is, that if I like A better than B and B better than C, then I must like A better than C as well. And what this allows us to do is it ensures that we have a consistent ranking, that when we think about the sets of bundles from best to worst, we can put them in an order that's consistent. I think that this is a relatively innocuous and relatively straightforward assumption as well. And then the final one is that we're going to argue that the marginal value of a good diminishes as we consume more of it. That is, if I sit down to eat a piece of pizza, the first piece gives me far more satisfaction than the fourth piece or the fifth piece. By the time I get to the eighth slice of deep dish pizza, for instance, I get far less enjoyment out of the last slice than I did out of the first slice. The way we're going to illustrate preferences is through the use of something called an indifference curve. And an indifference curve is a set of bundles that are equally preferred to each other. These are things that we would assign the same ranking to. We talked before about the ability to rank bundles, and if we consider a bundle that we might choose to consume, there are going to be things we like more, things we like less, and things that we like the same. And the indifference curve is going to be the set of things that we like the same, and it's going to split it's going to split the space that we look at when we draw our graphs into three different groups: the things that are on the indifference curve, the things that are above it, the things that we like better, that is, and the things that are below it, the things that we like less. And these indifference curves are going to help us with our analysis as we try to decide which choices the consumers are going to make. Now, how do we construct an indifference curve? We've got an example here where we begin by considering four different bundles, and we'll start with looking at bundle A, and we can say that clearly we like B better than A. By our assumption that more is preferred to less, B has more pizza than A, and therefore we like it better than A. It's got more pizza and the same amount of pop, so more of one good without giving up anything it means that B must be preferred to A. Clearly, we also like A better than C. We start with A and take 2 cans of pop away, and that's C. So C has less pop and the same amount of pizza. C must be less preferred than A. We must like A better than C. But what about A and D? Now, A and D is a place where we're making a trade-off. We're giving up 2 pops and adding 4 slices of pizza as we go from A to D. Now, some consumers may evaluate A differently than D. Some may prefer A to D. Some may prefer D to A. It depends on your own personal tastes and preferences. Now, what I feel comfortable about saying is if we started at C and we started adding some slices of pizza, and then eventually when we got to D we started adding some pop, somewhere between C and B on this path through D, there's going to be some combination that we like as much as A. We're going to, as we go from something we clearly like less to something we clearly like more, somewhere along the way we're going to hit something that we like exactly the same. Now, suppose, just for the sake of argument, that it happens to be that the bundle that we like equally as well as A is the bundle D. It might be something. It might be something a little bit, with a little bit less pizza or a little bit more pop or something like that. But suppose that the bundle D does in fact represent a bundle that is equally preferred to A, that we like the same as A. Now, that means that A and D lie on the same indifference curve, and I've drawn in a blue line here to represent the indifference curve, and we'll talk a little bit more about the shape as we go forward. But for now, the thing that I want you to observe is that bundle B lies above the indifference curve, and bundle C lies below the indifference curve. And if you look at a rank ordering, we can see that B is viewed as better than A is equal to D, and D is viewed as better than C. So B is greater than A in some sense. A is equal to D, and A and D are both greater than C. So the indifference curve then is splitting the plane up into three sections. Now, there's something that's important to recognize as we go through this, and that's that there's an indifference curve that goes through every bundle. Every bundle we might consider has an indifference curve that runs through it. There's an indifference curve that goes through A and D that we saw. There's also a different one that goes through B and a different one that goes through C. And these indifference curves represent different levels of satisfaction or happiness or ranking, or higher or lower rankings of the bundles. What we can say is that everything on the indifference curve that goes through B is more highly ranked than the bundles on the indifference curves that contains A and D, and the indifference curve that contains C. So B's indifference curve is the highest, A and D's is in the middle, and C's is the lowest of the ones that we've drawn here. If we add more points, if we consider more bundles, we'll be able to draw even more indifference curves. Another property of indifference curve that's important is to recognize that indifference curves cannot cross. Okay? They're downward sloping lines that they cannot cross. If you look at this for a second and look at the graph that we've drawn, some points on the yellow line lie above the blue. Right? That's more. Some points in the yellow indifference curve lie above the blue. That's up in the top left-hand part of the graph. Those have more pizza and pop than the ones in the top left-hand segment of the blue line. That must mean that those bundles are preferred, the bundles on the yellow indifference curve. But if we look at to the bottom right, we've got the opposite situation. The blue bundles have more than the yellow bundles. But so we can't have a situation where more is preferred to less implies that we prefer the yellow bundles to the blue, but then in a different part of the graph implies that we prefer the blue to the yellow. This is a contradiction, and this can't happen. So indifference curves cannot cross. The next thing that's important to consider is to recognize why we've drawn the indifference curves with the shape we have. Why have we drawn them? Why have we drawn them in a convex shape where they're bowed away from the origin? What I want you to do is to recognize what the slope of the indifference curve represents. This is important. The slope of the indifference curve represents how much you would be willing to trade of one good to get some more of the other. So how much do you prefer one versus the other? And if we consider moving from bundle D to bundle A, we know that because they're on the same indifference curve, we like them both the same. But stare at this and think about what it means. What it means is that somebody who starts with bundle D has to trade away 4 slices of pizza to get 2 pops. The slope of this indifference curve between A and D is minus 1/2. Right? We rise up 2 and we run -4 as we go from D back to A. So the slope between A and D is 4 for 2. 4 slices of pizza for 2 pops, or a slope of minus 1/2. What this says is between A and D, I value pizza about half as much as I value pop. Right? The slope tells me, and this is an important relationship to recognize, the slope tells me how much I value one good versus the other. Now, here's the tricky part. The tricky part is to recognize that the willingness I have to trade one good for another depends on where I am. So if I start at D and I move to the left, I'm willing to trade 4 slices of pizza for a pop and feel indifferent. Consider instead what happens if I start at E, where I start with 12 slices of pizza and only 1 pop. Here I've got a lot to eat, but not much to drink. And it might be the case here that I'd be willing to trade 6 slices of pizza to get another pop. And what we see is the slope between D and E is minus 1/6. What we have is that the indifference curve is getting flatter. The trade-off I'm willing to make becomes more, the trade-off I'm willing to make is very different than the trade-off that I was willing to make when I started at D. At D, I would trade 4 for 2. At E, I would trade 6 for 1. And the reason why we get this shape is because the assumption we made about diminishing marginal value that says that we value the 12th slice of pizza at something less than we valued the first, second, third, fourth, or fifth slice of pizza. So the trade-off we're willing to make is different.